certified incident briefings, real video evidence, strict accountability. You are viewing Bodycam incident reports.
Put the cart down and step away from the truck, now.
I paid for this lumber. Receipts in my back pocket.
Don't reach for anything. Hands where I can see them.
I'm making a mistake. I'm a federal liaison.
I don't care who you say you are. Turn around. You're going in cuffs.
Easy. These cuffs better come off quick.
Put that cart down and step away from the truck. I'm not asking you again, but I'm loading my supplies. Manager says you're stealing property. I bought this lumber 20 minutes ago. I've got the receipt right here in my pocket. Don't reach for anything. Hands where I can see them. You're making a mistake, son. I'm a federal liaison. I don't care if you're the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You're going into cuffs. Officer Kyle Vance had been patrolling the streets of Richmond for 6 years when he made the decision that would end his career, bankrupt a national retail chain, and cost the city $6.5 million. He was 28 years old, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his instinct for spotting criminals was flawless. On a bright Tuesday morning in the parking lot of Builders Depot, he received a call from a panicked store manager about a theft in progress involving a large man and a shopping cart. The large man was Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC, retired a 62-year-old combat veteran and current Federal Veteran Liaison who was simply loading plywood for a disabled veterans housing project. What Vance did next, ignoring Thorne's identification, dismissing physical receipts, and manhandling a decorated war hero in front of a crowd of shoppers, would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias rots the badge from the inside out. Before we get into the details, tell me where you are joining us from today. If you believe that respect should be earned and not demanded by a badge, hit that subscribe button. We are here to shine a light on the truth, and we need your help to do it. Builders Depot sits off the busy interstate bypass, a sprawling concrete box filled with contractors, suburban dads, and the smell of sawdust. It was 11:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. The autumn sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows across the asphalt. The parking lot was bustling with pickup trucks and vans. Marcus Thorne had backed his Ford F-150 into a spot near the loading zone. He wasn't a man who rushed. At 62, Thorne moved with the deliberate, efficient grace of a man who had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. He stood 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a faded gray t-shirt, work boots, and a ball cap that said Semper Fi. He was currently serving as a federal liaison for the Department of Veterans Affairs, a high-ranking civilian position that tasked him with auditing and facilitating housing programs for wounded warriors. He reported directly to Washington. But today, he was just a man buying 40 sheets of plywood and 20 boxes of framing nails for a renovation project in the city's south side. He had paid $1,200 in cash at the pro desk, shaken hands with the cashier, and wheeled the heavy flatbed cart out to his truck. He was halfway through sliding the third sheet of plywood into the truck bed when he heard the voice. It wasn't a polite "excuse me," it was a bark. "Hey, you stop right there." Thorne paused, holding the weight of the wood with one hand, and turned. Striding toward him was Brett Miller, the store's 29-year-old manager. Miller was wearing a stiff button-down shirt that looked uncomfortable in the heat, and his face was flushed with a mix of adrenaline and indignation. Miller had transferred to this location 3 months ago and had been on a crusade to reduce shrinkage, or theft, which he was convinced was rampant. He saw Thorne, a tall black man in work clothes, moving a large quantity of expensive lumber, and his mind immediately flagged it as suspicious. In Miller's limited worldview, customers who spent that kind of money usually wore polo shirts or company uniforms. They didn't look like Marcus Thorne. "Can I help you?" Thorne asked, his voice a deep baritone that carried easily over the traffic noise. He didn't drop the wood, he just held it waiting. Miller stopped 5 feet away, pointing a finger. "I need to see a receipt for that, right now. We've had guys loading up carts and walking out the front door all month. You're not taking that anywhere." Thorne frowned, his patience already tested by the heavy lifting. "I paid at the pro desk not 10 minutes ago. The receipt is in my back pocket. Let me just load this sheet." "No," Miller shouted, stepping closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "Drop the wood. Hands out of your pockets. You're trying to scam us. I saw you bypass the checkout line." Thorne slowly lowered the plywood into the truck bed, dusting his hands off on his jeans. He turned fully to face the younger man towering over him, not with aggression, but with presence. "Son, I didn't bypass anything. I went to the pro desk. If you want to see the receipt, I will show you the receipt, but you need to lower your voice." Miller didn't like being called son, and he certainly didn't like being told what to do by someone he had already decided was a thief. "I'm calling the police," Miller announced, pulling his phone out with a trembling hand. "You're trespassing and you're stealing inventory. Stay right there." Thorne sighed a sound of profound exhaustion. He leaned against the side of his truck, crossed his massive arms, and gestured to the phone. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll wait." Miller dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Thorne, as if he expected the 62-year-old to bolt across the parking lot. "Yes, I have a shoplifter at the Builders Depot on Broad Street. Aggressive male. He's trying to steal $1,000 worth of lumber. He's refusing to leave. I feel threatened. Send someone now." Officer Kyle Vance was 3 miles away when the call came over the radio. "Code 3 response, Builders Depot. Larceny in progress. Suspect is a black male, 60s, large build, reportedly aggressive with staff." Vance hit the lights and sirens, his heart rate jumping. Vance had been with the force for 6 years, and like Officer Bartlett in Seattle, he had a file that was thicker than it should have been. 6 civilian complaints in the last 2 years. Discourtesy, unlawful stop, excessive force. None of them had stuck. The department called him proactive. His sergeant called him a hard charger. The community called him a bully. Vance had a specific view of the world. There were wolves and there were sheepdogs. He considered himself a sheepdog, but he had a terrible habit of seeing wolves where there were only neighbors. As Vance wove through traffic, his mind constructed the scenario before he even saw it. In his head, he wasn't driving toward a misunderstanding. He was driving toward a confrontation. Aggressive male, refusing to leave. These words triggered a tactical response in Vance that overrode his training in de-escalation. He griped the steering wheel, adrenaline flooding his system. He wasn't thinking about conflict resolution. He was thinking about control. Establish dominance, neutralize the threat, secure the scene. That was the mantra. He didn't consider that the suspect might be a customer. He didn't consider that the manager might be wrong. He certainly didn't consider that he was about to go toe-to-toe with a man who had led battalions into combat zones while Vance was still learning to tie his shoes. When Vance's cruiser screeched into the parking lot, he saw the scene exactly as Miller had described it, but interpreted through his own biased lens. He saw a large black man standing by a truck filled with merchandise. He saw a white manager standing back, looking fearful. That was all the confirmation Vance needed. He parked his cruiser diagonally behind Thorne's F-150, effectively boxing him in. He stepped out of the vehicle, not with a notepad, but with his hand resting on the grip of his holstered service weapon. The crowd in the parking lot had grown. Shoppers pushing carts slowed down to watch. A few people had already pulled out their phones. Thorne watched the officer approach. He had seen this walk before. He had seen it in young Marines who were too eager for a fight, and he had seen it in military police who had forgotten that their job was to serve. He stood up straight, uncrossing his arms, keeping his hands visible and open at his sides. He knew the drill. He knew that any sudden movement, any reach for a wallet could be interpreted as a threat by a jittery cop. "Officer," Thorne said calmly as Vance marched up. "I'm glad you're here. Maybe we can clear this up. The manager seems to think—" "Quiet," Vance barked, stopping 6 feet away. "I didn't ask you to speak, you two. Step away from the vehicle. Now." Thorne held his ground, his voice steady. "I am complying, officer. I am stepping away, but I need to tell you that I have proof of purchase right here." "I told you to be quiet." Vance shouted, his voice cracking slightly. He was escalating, feeding off the tension he was creating. "You are being detained for investigation of grand larceny. Turn around and face the truck." Thorne looked at the officer, really looked at him. He saw the sweat on Vance's brow, the tight set of his jaw, the eyes that were darting around but refusing to make genuine human contact. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the command tone he had used to brief generals. "You are making a mistake. I am a federal official. I have identification in my pocket that you need to see. I have a receipt for these goods." Vance stepped forward, grabbing Thorne's left arm. "I said turn around. Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Thorne stated clearly, looking directly at the camera phone that a woman in a minivan was pointing at them. "I am standing still. I am telling you that I have a receipt. I am telling you that I am a Federal Veteran Liaison. Check my credentials." Vance sneered. "Federal Liaison? Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. Anyone can buy a fake badge on the internet. Turn around or you're getting tased." The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Thorne knew he could physically overpower the young officer with little effort. He knew hand-to-hand combat techniques that Vance had only seen in movies. But he also knew that if he so much as flinched, he would be shot. And if he was shot, the narrative would be, "Suspect attacked officer." So he chose the weapon of the disciplined, absolute, terrifying calm. "I am turning around," Thorne said, moving slowly. "I am placing my hands on the truck. You are now arresting a federal employee without cause. You are refusing to verify exculpatory evidence. You are violating my civil rights." Vance didn't care. He kicked Thorne's legs apart, roughly patting him down. He felt the wallet in the back pocket, pulled it out, and threw it on the hood of the truck. He felt the receipt paper, crumpled it, and tossed it to the ground. "That's trash," Vance muttered. "You're under arrest for grand larceny and resisting arrest." He grabbed Thorne's wrists and twisted them behind his back, snapping the handcuffs on tight. Too tight. "Hey!" a voice shouted from the crowd. It was an older man in a plaid shirt. "He showed you the receipt. We heard him. You threw it on the ground." Vance spun his head around. "Back up, or you're next for obstruction." The manager Miller was smiling now, a smug look of victory on his face. "I told you," Miller said to the crowd. "He was stealing. We have zero tolerance here." Thornface, pressed against the hot metal of his own truck, closed his eyes for a second. He thought of the oath he had taken to support and defend the Constitution. He thought of the Silver Star sitting in a frame in his study awarded for pulling 3 men out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. And now he was being handcuffed by a child with a badge who thought a black man with lumber had to be a thief. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice muffled against the truck. "My credentials are in that wallet you just threw. The badge is silver and gold. It says Department of Veterans Affairs Office of the Secretary. Open it." Vance finished tightening the cuffs and grabbed the wallet. He flipped it open, glanced at the heavy metal badge and the laminated ID card with the holographic seal. He paused for a fraction of a second. A smarter man would have stopped. A smarter man would have seen the words Federal Liaison and Law Enforcement Authority and realized he had stepped into a bear trap. But Vance wasn't smart. He was committed. He snapped the wallet shut and shoved it into his own pocket. "Nice toy," Vance said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Ordered that online, huh? Impersonating a federal officer. That's another charge. Let's go." Vance hauled Thorne away from the truck, marching him toward the patrol car. Thorne didn't struggle. He walked with his head up his eyes, scanning the crowd, memorizing faces, looking for witnesses. "My name is Colonel Marcus Thorne," he announced, his voice projecting like he was on the parade deck. "I am being arrested unlawfully. Please record this. Please keep recording." Vance shoved him into the back of the cruiser. The space was cramped, the hard plastic seat unforgiving. As the door slammed shut, separating him from the outside world, Thorne felt a cold, sharp anger settle in his gut. It wasn't the hot rage of youth. It was the cold, strategic fury of a man who knows exactly how to dismantle an enemy. He watched through the wire mesh as Vance strutted back to the manager, the two of them shaking hands, sharing a laugh. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken out the trash. They had no idea they had just initiated a sequence of events that would burn their professional lives to the ground. The drive to the precinct was a 12-minute journey through the suburbs. Vance drove with one hand on the wheel, typing on his dash computer with the other. He glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Thorne's eyes. "You know," Vance said, his tone conversational, now dripping with condescension, "if you people just listened, things wouldn't get this far. You want respect, you gotta give respect. You don't argue with the police." Thorne sat silently. He was mentally drafting the memo he would send to the Department of Justice. He was cataloging the timestamps. 11:42 a.m. unlawful arrest. 11:45 a.m. seizure of personal property without inventory. 11:50 a.m. failure to read Miranda rights. "I'm talking to you," Vance said, annoyed by the silence. "You mute now, Cat, got your tongue. Or are you thinking about how you're going to explain that fake badge to the judge?" "Officer Vance," Thorne said, speaking for the first time since being put in the car. He had read the nameplate on the dashboard. "I am not speaking to you because anything I say can be used against me. But I will tell you this. I served this country for 30 years. I have grandchildren older than you, and the badge in your pocket is not a toy. When we get to the station, do not put it in evidence. Give it directly to the watch commander, for your own sake." Vance laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Yeah, okay, Grandpa. I'll be sure to do that. Maybe they'll give you a senior discount on your bail." Vance turned up the radio, drowning out the silence, oblivious to the fact that he was driving a hearse for his own career. They arrived at the 4th precinct. Vance pulled into the sally port, the garage door rumbling shut behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car, gripping his arm tightly, parading him past the dispatch window and into the booking area. The station smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Reynolds. Reynolds was 58, a Vietnam vet who had been a cop since the 80s. He had tired eyes, and he had seen everything. He looked up as Vance dragged Thorne in. Reynolds stiffened. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at Thorne. He saw the posture. He saw the haircut. He saw the eyes. Game recognizes game. "What do we have here, Vance?" Reynolds asked, his voice wary. "Grand larceny, resisting impersonating an officer," Vance announced proudly. "Caught him stealing lumber at Builder's Depot. Tried to flash some fake federal ID to get out of it." Reynolds stood up slowly. He looked at Thorne. "Sir," Thorne looked Reynolds in the eye. "Sergeant, I am Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC retired. I am the Federal Veteran Liaison for this district. Your officer refused to check my receipt and refused to verify my credentials. He has my wallet in his pocket." The air left the room. Reynolds looked at Vance. "Vance, give me the wallet." Vance rolled his eyes. "Sarge, come on. It's a prop. It looks like—" "Give me the damn wallet, Kyle!" Reynolds roared, slamming his hand on the desk. Vance jumped, startled. He fished the wallet out and tossed it onto the counter. Reynolds opened it. He didn't just glance. He examined. He took out the ID card. He held it up to the light. He ran his thumb over the embossed seal. He looked at the secondary card. Top secret security clearance, Department of Defense. Reynolds went pale. He looked up at Thorne, then at Vance. "Vance," Reynolds said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you know what a federal liaison does?" Vance shrugged. "Coordinate parades." "They report to the cabinet," Reynolds said, his voice rising. "They have federal law enforcement authority on VA matters. This ID is real. This man is a colonel." Reynolds looked at the handcuffs on Thorne's wrists. "Uncuff him, now." Vance blinked. "But Sarge, the manager said—" "I don't give a damn what the manager said. You arrested a federal official for shopping. Get those cuffs off him before the feds come down here and turn this precinct into a parking lot." Vance fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne rubbed his wrists where deep red grooves had formed. He didn't rub them to soothe the pain. He rubbed them to restore circulation. He looked at Vance, who was suddenly looking very small. "I want the station commander," Thorne said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room. "I want a camera to photograph these injuries, and I want my phone. I need to make a call to Washington." Reynolds picked up the desk phone immediately. "Captain, you need to come down here, now. Yes, it's bad." The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. By the time Thorne left the station 3 hours later, escorted by the captain and 2 lieutenants who were profusely apologizing, the video from the parking lot had already hit the internet. White officer arrests. Black veteran with receipt. Builders Depot manager calls cops on federal agent. The optics were catastrophic. The footage showed a calm, dignified older man offering proof and a young aggressive officer escalating to violence. It showed the manager Miller smirking. It showed the receipt crumpled on the ground. By Wednesday morning, news trucks were camped out in front of the precinct. The hashtag Colonel Thorne was trending nationwide. The narrative was undeniable. A man who had defended his country abroad was treated like a criminal at home. But the real investigation unearthed the rot beneath the surface. The Internal Affairs review of Officer Vance wasn't just bad, it was damning. 6 prior complaints, all involving black men, all dismissed by his supervisors as unfounded or within policy. There was a pattern of contempt of cop arrests, Vance arresting people not for crimes but for questioning his authority. The investigation into Builders Depot was equally ruinous. Corporate headquarters panicked. They fired Brett Miller, immediately issuing a statement condemning his failure to follow protocol and gross judgmental error. But the internet doesn't forget. Former employees came forward with stories of Miller's bias, how he followed black customers, how he ignored white contractors who walked out with tools. The store's rating plummeted. People boycotted. Stocks dipped. Marcus Thorne didn't go on TV. He didn't do the talk show circuit. He hired a civil rights attorney, a shark named Eleanor Graves, and they filed a federal lawsuit. The suit named Vance the police department, the city Brett Miller, and Builders Depot. The charges were extensive. False arrest, assault, battery, defamation, civil rights violations. Malicious prosecution. The discovery phase was a nightmare for the city. Emails surfaced where Vance joked about thugs in the parking lots. Performance reviews showed his sergeant telling him to keep the stats up, but be careful with the cameras. It revealed a culture that rewarded aggression and punished de-escalation. The city attorneys took one look at Thorne's service record, his spotless federal career, and the high-definition video of the arrest, and they waved the white flag. They settled for $6.5 million. Builders Depot settled for an undisclosed amount, rumored to be in the 7 figures, along with a commitment to mandatory bias training for all 40,000 employees nationwide. Officer Kyle Vance was fired. But Thorne demanded more than just termination. As part of the settlement, the city was forced to report Vance to the National Decertification Index. He would never be a police officer again. Not in this state, not in any state. At 28, his career in law enforcement was dead. The final chapter played out in City Hall 2 months later. The City Council was holding a special hearing on police reform. The room was packed. When Marcus Thorne walked to the podium, the room went silent. He wore a suit, now not work clothes. He looked every inch the statesman. "Council members," Thorne began, his voice steady. "I spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. I learned that authority without discipline is dangerous. I learned that you judge a man by his actions, not his appearance." He paused, looking at the empty chair where the police chief usually sat. The chief had resigned the week prior. "Officer Vance didn't see a colonel. He didn't see a Federal Liaison. He didn't even see a customer. He saw a stereotype. And because he saw a stereotype, he felt justified in stripping away my rights. Thorne leaned forward. I have the resources to fight back. I have the badge. I have the lawyers. But what about the young man who doesn't? What about the carpenter who just wants to build a house? If this can happen to me with all my protection, what chance does an ordinary citizen have? The room remained deadly silent. Thorne's question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. This wasn't just a story about a bad apple. It was a story about the barrel. It was about the permission structure that allowed a 29-year-old manager and a 28-year-old cop to look at a 62-year-old hero and see a threat. Justice was served, yes. The money was paid. The bad actors were removed. But as Thorne walked out of City Hall that day into the bright autumn sun, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. He felt the weight of all the times this had happened before to men who didn't have a silver star to save them. He got into his truck, the same truck from the parking lot, and drove to the veterans' housing site. The plywood was late, but the work had to continue. We have to ask ourselves, why is calm compliance so often interpreted as resistance when it comes from certain people? Should police officers be personally liable for civil rights violations? Or should the taxpayers keep footing the bill? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are difficult, but ignoring them only guarantees they will happen again. If you believe in accountability, please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.
Sir, I told you already. You need to leave this property now.
I'm not leaving. I belong here. I haven't broken any law.
You don't get to decide that. Step away from the door and show me ID.
I'm a retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant. I'm standing on a public sidewalk.
I don't care who you think you are.
Then you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career.
Officer Kyle Vance had been wearing the badge of the Metro Police Department for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career, humiliate his superiors, and cost the taxpayers of the city $1.9 million. He was 29 years old, fit, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his authority was absolute. On a bright, crisp Tuesday morning outside the Oakwood Community Center, he received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual refusing to leave the premises. The suspicious individual was Master Sergeant retired Marcus Thorne, a man who had served the United States Army for 25 years, standing stoically by the entrance with a canvas bag of books and coffee waiting to unlock the doors. What Officer Vance did next, ignoring the man's calm demeanor, dismissing his verbal identification, and physically assaulting a disabled combat veteran in plain view of morning commuters, would become a searing indictment of how quickly protect and serve can curdle into dominate and control. Before we get into the details of this miscarriage of justice, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that our veterans deserve better than handcuffs and pavement, please hit that subscribe button. We need to tell these stories because the mainstream media often moves on too fast, but the scars last a lifetime. The Oakwood Community Center is a brick-and-mortar staple of the neighborhood, sitting squarely on the corner of Elm and Main. It's the heartbeat of the district, a place that hosts everything from morning yoga for seniors to evening town halls. The neighborhood itself is in transition. What used to be a working-class block of row houses is slowly being transformed by developers into condos and high-end retail spaces. New money is moving in, and with it, a new set of expectations about who belongs on the sidewalk and who doesn't. It was 8:45 a.m. The sun was cutting through the maple trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. The morning traffic was steady, people rushing to offices and appointments. Marcus Thorne stood near the double-glass doors of the center. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't lurking. He was standing with his feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the horizon with the patience of a man who had spent days waiting in the desert heat for orders that might never come. He was wearing a clean-pressed pair of cargo pants, a gray polo shirt tucked in with a military web belt, and sturdy hiking boots. At 48 years old, Thorne cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders, a shaved head, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. But his eyes were calm. He wasn't bothering the pedestrians walking their dogs. He wasn't asking for money. He was simply waiting. The janitor, old Mr. Henderson, was running late with the master alarm code, and Thorne was merely holding the post until he arrived. But to the wrong set of eyes, patience looks like loitering, and silence looks like a threat. Marcus Thorne was not a man who sought attention. For 2.5 decades, he had been a ghost in the machine of the United States military, a master sergeant who specialized in logistics and forward operating base security. He had done 4 tours in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan. He had organized supply lines under mortar fire in Fallujah. He had negotiated with village elders in the Kandahar province. He had held the hands of 19-year-old boys as they bled out in the sand, promising them that they would not be forgotten. When he retired 3 years ago, he brought home a chest full of medals, including a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with valor, and a body held together by surgical pins and sheer willpower. His right shoulder had been shattered by an IED blast in 2014, leaving him with limited range of motion and chronic pain that he managed with meditation and swimming, never opioids. He didn't drink. He didn't complain. He lived a life of regimented simplicity. For the past 10 years, even during his final years of active duty, when he was stationed locally, Thorne had volunteered at the Oakwood Community Center. He ran the Vets for Vets support group every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. It was a lifeline for men and women returning home with ghosts in their heads. Thorne was the rock they clung to. He arrived early every single week to set up the chairs, brew the coffee, and ensure the room was a safe space before the others arrived. He was a fixture. The neighborhood kids knew him as Sarge. The local shop owners waved when he walked by, but neighborhoods change and memory is short. That Tuesday, Thorne had arrived at 8:30 a.m. as usual. He found the doors locked. Mr. Henderson, the custodian who usually unlocked the facility, had called Thorne 10 minutes earlier, apologetic, saying his car wouldn't start and he'd be 20 minutes late. Thorne had told him not to worry. "I'll stand watch, Jim. Get here when you get here." So, Thorne stood watch. He placed his bag on the concrete bench containing the group's sign-in sheets and a bag of premium coffee he bought out of his own pocket, and assumed his waiting stance. He was reviewing the lesson plan for the day in his mind, thinking about how to help a young Marine who had just joined the group deal with his survivor's guilt. He didn't know that 50 feet away, through the blinds of the administrative office window, he was being watched. He didn't know that his stillness was being interpreted as obstinance. He didn't know that his very presence was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose the ugly underbelly of the safety culture permeating the new Oakwood. Thorne was a man who believed in the chain of command in rules and in the inherent decency of institutions. He believed that if you followed the law, honored your country, and carried yourself with dignity, you would be afforded respect. He was experienced enough to know the world was unfair, but he still held on to the idea that in his own neighborhood, on his own block, his service meant something. He was about to find out that to some people a black man standing still is a crime in itself. Julianne Ebersol had been the operations manager at the Oakwood Community Center for exactly 3 weeks. At 34 years old, she was a whirlwind of new policies, new memos, and a desperate need to prove that she could clean up the place. She had been hired by a board of directors that wanted to modernize the center to make it more appealing to the affluent families moving into the newly renovated lofts downtown. Julianne took that mandate seriously. She saw herself not just as an administrator, but as the guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic. She didn't know the history of the place. She didn't know the regulars. She didn't know Marcus Thorne. What she saw through her window was a large, muscular black man in paramilitary clothing standing right by the front door. He hadn't moved in 15 minutes. He wasn't looking at a phone. He was just standing there staring out at the street. To Julianne, whose previous experience was in managing high-end HOA properties in the suburbs, this was a red flag. This was blight. This was a deterrent to the mothers with strollers who would be arriving for the 10 o'clock a.m. tumble tots class. She watched him for another 5 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into a narrative of danger. Why is he just standing there? Is he casing the building? Is he on drugs? He looks intense. In her mind, Thorne wasn't a veteran waiting for a key. He was a vagrant staking a claim. She convinced herself that she had seen him scowl at a passerby, though Thorne had merely squinted against the sun. Julianne didn't walk outside to ask him if he needed help. She didn't open the door to ask his business. That would require confronting her own discomfort. Instead, she chose the path of least resistance and maximum escalation. She picked up the phone. 911, what is your emergency? This isn't an emergency, but I need an officer at the Oakwood Community Center immediately. Julianne said, her voice trembling with a manufactured fear she had talked herself into. There is a man refusing to leave the entrance. He's blocking the doors. Is he aggressive, ma'am? Is he armed? He looks very aggressive. Julianne lied, justifying it to herself as a preventative measure. He's a very large man dressed in military-style clothes. He's been loitering here for half an hour. I'm afraid to open the doors for the staff. He looks like he might be mentally unstable. Has he threatened anyone? He's making people uncomfortable, Julianne said, using the magic words that she knew would trigger a response. Parents are trying to drop off kids and they are scared to walk past him. That was another lie. There were no parents yet. The Tumble Tots class didn't start for an hour. But Julianne needed him gone, and she needed the police to prioritize it. Okay, ma'am. We have an officer in the vicinity. We'll send someone over to remove him. Julianne hung up, feeling a surge of righteous accomplishment. She was protecting her facility. She was doing her job. She peeked through the blinds again. Thorne hadn't moved. He was just breathing the morning air, oblivious to the fact that his description, large black male military clothing, aggressive possible mental health issue, was currently being beamed to a patrol car 2 blocks away. Officer Kyle Vance heard the dispatch and felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. Aggressive male, refusing to leave, scaring women and children. This was the kind of call Vance liked. It was straightforward. It required a show of force. Vance was not a bad cop in his own eyes. He saw himself as a sheepdog. The world was full of wolves, and it was his job to bark and bite until the wolves ran away. But in his 6 years on the force, his definition of a wolf had become dangerously broad. He had accumulated 14 complaints in his short career. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct. 2 were for excessive force. All of them had been dismissed or resulted in minor counseling. The department knew Vance was a hothead. His sergeant had told him twice to dial it back. But his arrest numbers were high. He cleared corners. He made the stats look good. And in a department that was understaffed and overworked, results often mattered more than methods. Vance had a specific view of the district he patrolled. He believed that order was maintained through dominance. If you gave an inch, they took a mile. If you let a guy loiter today, tomorrow he's selling drugs, and the day after that he's breaking windows. Broken windows policing was his Bible, but he read it with a heavy accent on the punishment and very little on the community. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb in front of the community center at 8:53 a.m. He didn't park in a spot. He pulled up diagonally, blocking the view, establishing territory. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt. He didn't put his hat on. He wanted to look ready for a fight. He saw the suspect immediately. Thorne matched the description perfectly. Big guy, cargo pants, standing like a statue. Vance didn't see a disciplined soldier. He saw a defiant thug who thought he owned the sidewalk. He didn't see the calm posture. He saw the 1,000-yard stare of someone on something or someone looking for trouble. Vance didn't start with a good morning. He didn't start with, "Can I help you?" He walked around the front of his cruiser, his hand resting instinctively near his holster, his chest puffed out. He had already decided how this interaction was going to go. The subject was going to submit, or the subject was going to be made to submit. He walked fast, closing the distance, aggressively invading Thorne's personal space before a word was spoken. This was a tactic Vance used often: shock and awe. Make them back up. make them flinch. But Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He simply turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Vance's sunglasses. He watched the officer approach with the same detached assessment he had used to watch convoys approaching a checkpoint, and that lack of fear was the first thing that offended Officer Vance. "You need to move along, pal. You can't be here," Vance barked, stopping 3 feet from Thorne's face. Thorne didn't break his stance. He kept his hands clasped behind his back. He spoke in a deep, resonant baritone that carried no anger, only authority. "Good morning, officer. I am waiting for the facility to open." "Did you hear me? I said move along. We got calls. You're scaring the staff. You're trespassing on private property." "This is a public community center, officer, and I am not trespassing. I am a volunteer and a key holder. The custodian is late." Thorne nodded toward the glass doors. "If you check with the administration—" "I don't need to check anything," Vance interrupted, stepping closer. "The manager called it in. She wants you gone. That means you're gone. Now take a walk before I write you up for loitering." Thorne took a slow breath. He recognized the type. He had seen young lieutenants like this in the desert, arrogant, eager for action, and dangerous because they didn't know what they didn't know. "Officer, my name is Marcus Thorne. I am a retired master sergeant. I run the Veterans Support Group here every Tuesday at 0900. I am not leaving my post because a manager I have never met is confused." "Oh, you're a lawyer now. You're a sergeant," Vance sneered. He hated when suspects claimed status. "I don't care if you're the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When I tell you to move, you move. Let me see some ID." "I am not required to show you identification. I have committed no crime. I am standing on a public sidewalk." "Failure to identify. Disobeying a lawful order." Vance recited, his voice rising, playing to the invisible audience he imagined was cheering him on. "You're making this difficult, Marcus. Is that your name, Marcus? My name is Mr. Thorne to you, officer." Vance's face flushed red. The lack of submission was eating at him. He was losing control of the dynamic, and his only tool for regaining it was escalation. "Last chance. Get your hands out from behind your back and show me ID or you're going for a ride." Thorne remained perfectly still. "I have a bag on the bench there. My wallet is inside. I am happy to show you my ID if you ask me respectfully and acknowledge that I have a right to be here, but I will not be bullied off this corner like a criminal." "That's it," Vance snapped. "You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct." "Disorderly?" Thorne raised an eyebrow. "I haven't moved an inch." "Turn around. Hands on your head." Vance reached out and grabbed Thorne's right shoulder, the shoulder that had been reconstructed with titanium and screws. Thorne winced, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth as the nerve pain shot down his arm. "Watch the shoulder, officer. I have a combat injury." "Stop resisting," Vance yelled, though Thorne hadn't moved. The officer interpreted the wince as resistance. He yanked the arm harder, twisting it behind Thorne's back with unnecessary torque. "I am not resisting," Thorne said through gritted teeth, his voice straining but still controlled. "You are hurting a disabled veteran. You are making a mistake that you cannot undo." "Shut up." Vance shoved Thorne against the brick wall of the center. "Spread 'em." By now, the commotion had drawn attention. 2 women from the accounting firm next door had stopped on the sidewalk. A delivery driver had pulled over, and inside the community center, the front door clicked open. It wasn't Julianne Ebersol. It was Mrs. Gable, the 60-year-old receptionist who had known Thorne for a decade. She stepped out, her eyes widening in horror. Behind her was a young man, a summer intern who immediately pulled out his smartphone. "Officer, stop!" Mrs. Gable shouted, rushing toward them. "That is Mr. Thorne. He works here." Vance ignored her. He was in the tunnel now. He had the cuffs out. He slapped one onto Thorne's right wrist and wrenched the left arm back. Thorne groaned a low, guttural sound of pain as the metal bit into his skin and his shoulder joint screamed in protest. Back off, lady, Vance yelled over his shoulder. This subject is under arrest. He's not a subject, Mrs. Gable screamed, tears forming in her eyes. He's a hero. He's waiting for the meeting. Julianne, tell him. Julianne Ebersol had emerged from the door looking pale. She saw the scene. The aggressive man was being handcuffed, but he wasn't fighting. He was calm, and the receptionist was screaming in his defense. Julianne realized with a sinking feeling in her gut that she had miscalculated, but she was too proud to admit it. She stood frozen in the doorway, saying nothing. I am complying, Thorne said loud enough for the intern's phone to pick up. I am Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne. I am not resisting. This officer is injuring my surgically repaired shoulder. I am asking you to loosen the cuffs. Tell it to the judge, Vance grunted. He double-locked the cuffs tight. He patted Thorne down roughly, pulling the wallet from the bag on the bench and shoving it into his own pocket without looking at it. He spun Thorne around. You're making a scene, you know that, Vance said, panting slightly from the exertion. Thorne looked Vance in the eye. The veteran's face was covered in a sheen of sweat from the pain, but his gaze was unbroken. I didn't make the scene, officer. You did. And this video, he nodded toward the intern, is going to end your career. Get in the car. Vance shoved him toward the cruiser. He forced Thorne's large frame into the back seat, bending his head down roughly. Thorne had to twist his body to protect his shoulder, gasping as he sat on the hard plastic seat. Vance slammed the door. He walked around to the driver's side, feeling a moment of triumph. He had cleared the corner. He had won. He looked at the crowd gathering on the sidewalk, Mrs. Gable crying, the intern filming the delivery driver, shaking his head, and he felt a flicker of doubt. But he crushed it. He was the law. The law is never wrong. He got in, radioed that he had one in custody, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the veteran's bag of books and coffee sitting on the bench like a tombstone. The ride to the 4th precinct took 15 minutes. Thorne sat in the back, practicing tactical breathing. In through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 4. He needed to manage the pain in his shoulder, which was now a throbbing fire. He needed to keep his heart rate down. He knew that any outburst now would be used against him. He remained silent. Vance glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the suspect to be cursing, kicking the doors, or begging. The silence unnerved him. Quiet back there. I realized you screwed up. Thorne said nothing. They arrived at the station. Vance pulled Thorne out of the car and marched him into the booking area. The precinct was busy. Phones were ringing. Officers were typing reports. At the main desk sat Desk Sergeant Miller, a 55-year-old veteran of the force with gray hair and a mustache that had seen 3 decades of city history. What do we have, Vance? Miller asked, not looking up from his paperwork. Trespassing, disorderly, refusing to ID, resisting. Vance rattled off the charges, pushing Thorne toward the counter. Miller looked up. He saw the man in handcuffs. He saw the military bearing. He saw the scar on the neck. He saw the pained grimace that the man was trying to hide. Refusing to ID, Miller asked, looking at Thorne. Sir, do you have identification? It is in my wallet. Thorne said, his voice raspy. Officer Vance confiscated it. It is in his pocket. Miller held out his hand to Vance. Give me the wallet. Vance handed it over. He wouldn't show it at the scene. He was being difficult. Miller opened the worn leather bifold. The first thing he saw was not a driver's license. It was a retired military identification card. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army. Below that was another card, City Council Veterans Advisory Board, board member. And tucked behind that was a folded copy of his VA disability rating, 100% service-connected. Miller's face went white. He looked from the ID to Thorne, then to Vance. Vance, Miller said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You arrested Marcus Thorne. I don't know, is that his name? He was loitering at the community center? "He's on the city council board, you idiot," Miller hissed. "He runs the support group there. We send our own guys to him for counseling." Vance froze. The manager called. She said he was threatening." Miller ignored Vance. He came around the desk, moving faster than he had in years. "Uncuff him. Now." "Sarge," he resisted. "I said uncuff him right now." Miller roared, silencing the entire room. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Vance fumbled for his keys. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his arms forward, slowly groaning as the blood rushed back. His wrists were deeply indented and bruised. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, his tone apologetic and horrified. "I am incredibly sorry. I know who you are. I know your service." Thorne rubbed his wrists. He looked at Vance, who was standing there pale and shrinking. "Sergeant Miller," Thorne said calmly, "I need medical attention for my shoulder, and I want to file a formal complaint against this officer for assault, false imprisonment, and violation of my civil rights. I also want his body camera footage secured immediately." "It's already done," Miller said. He looked at Vance with a look of absolute disgust. "Vance, put your badge and gun on the counter. You're going into the captain's office. Don't speak to anyone." Vance looked at the wallet on the desk. He looked at the man he had called a thug. He realized with a nausea that hit him like a wave that the wolf he thought he had caught was actually a lion. And the lion was about to eat him alive. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video taken by the intern hit social media before Thorne had even left the hospital. It showed everything. The calm veteran, the hysterical manager in the doorway, the aggressive officer twisting the arm of a man who wasn't fighting back. The headline wrote itself, "Hero Handcuffed Cop Assaults Disabled Vet at Community Center." By 5:00 p.m. that Tuesday, protesters had gathered outside the Oakwood Community Center. By Wednesday morning, Julianne Ebersol was fired. The board of directors released a statement condemning her racial bias and lack of judgment. She tried to sue for wrongful termination, but the discovery phase revealed her text messages to a friend describing Thorne as a scary stray, which sealed her fate in the court of public opinion. Officer Kyle Vance was placed on unpaid suspension. The internal affairs investigation was concluded in record time, largely because Master Sergeant Thorne testified with the precision of a man who had written thousands of incident reports. Vance was fired 3 weeks later. The chief of police personally apologized to Thorne, but the apology didn't fix the torn rotator cuff that required another surgery to repair. Thorne sued the city and the police department. He didn't do it for the money. He did it to force a change in policy. The lawsuit exposed the pattern of complaints against Vance that had been ignored. It exposed the lack of de-escalation training. The city settled for $1.9 million to avoid a trial that would have been a public relations massacre. Marcus Thorne donated a significant portion of the settlement to the Vets for Vets program, ensuring it had permanent funding. He returned to the community center the very next Tuesday, his arm in a sling to unlock the doors. But the story isn't just about the money or the firing. It's about the silence that fell over the neighborhood. The realization that for all our flags and bumper stickers supporting the troops, we still judge a book by its cover. We still allow fear to dictate how we treat our neighbors. Marcus Thorne stood on that corner for 25 years defending the Constitution. He stood there that Tuesday defending his dignity. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a man with a chest full of medals, a spotless record, and the patience of a saint can be treated like a criminal on a sunny Tuesday morning, what happens to the young man who doesn't have the rank? What happens to the person who can't remain calm while their arm is being twisted? Justice was served in the end, but the scar remains. Not just on Marcus Thorne's shoulder, but on the conscience of a community that had to ask itself, who are we really protecting, and who are we afraid of? Do you think the settlement was enough? Or should Officer Vance have faced criminal charges for assault? And do you think managers like Julianne should be personally liable for making false reports? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you appreciate us bringing you the truth behind the headlines, please like and subscribe. It helps us keep the lights on and the stories coming. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for each other.
Sir, last warning. Stand up and show me your ID or you're going in cuffs.
No, officer. You have no reasonable suspicion. Sitting here is not a crime.
You're refusing a lawful order.
Then articulate the crime, because right now, you're the one breaking the law.
Turn around, now.
If you touch me, you own everything that happens next.
Officer Kyle Braden, 29 years old and eager to prove his proactive policing stance, did not like the tone of the man sitting on the concrete bench. To Braden, the man looked like a vagrant wearing a faded olive green field jacket, comfortable cargo pants, and a worn baseball cap pulled low against the midday sun. He was sitting too still, staring too intently at the water of the municipal fountain in the center of the downtown plaza. Braden assumed the man was homeless, perhaps intoxicated and definitely out of place in the revitalized business district. But the man, Marcus Thorne, was neither homeless nor intoxicated. He was 62 years old, a homeowner in the historic district, and he was currently enjoying the rhythmic sound of the water which helped manage the tinnitus he had lived with for 30 years. He hadn't moved an inch since Braden approached him. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't reached for anything. He simply sat there radiating a kind of calm that Braden mistook for defiance. "Sir, I'm going to go hands-on if you don't comply." Braden warned, his hand drifting to the taser on his belt. The heavy black utility belt creaked as he shifted his stance, trying to intimidate the older man. "That would be a mistake, son," Thorne said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and steady. It wasn't the voice of someone afraid of the police. It was the voice of someone who had given orders to men much tougher than Kyle Braden. "I haven't committed a crime. I haven't broken any municipal code. I am enjoying the sunshine." "We had a call," Braden lied. There was no call. He had just seen a black man in old clothes sitting in a high-rent district and decided to investigate. A call about a suspicious individual casing businesses. You fit the description. The description was a black man sitting down, Thorne asked, finally tilting his head up to look Braden in the eye. "That's not a description of a suspect, officer. That's a demographic." "Let me see your ID," Braden snapped. "No." "What did you say to me?" "I said no. Unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to provide identification. It's a nice day. Why don't you go patrol somewhere that actually needs you?" Braden's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his uniform. He wasn't used to people knowing the law better than he did. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. Before we see how Officer Braden destroys his entire career in the next 10 minutes, I need you to do something for me. Stop and think about how you would react if an armed agent of the state demanded your papers while you were minding your own business. Would you comply? Or would you stand your ground? Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, your state, your city, and type freedom if you believe the Constitution still matters in this country. And if you support holding bad cops accountable, hit that subscribe button right now. You are not going to believe who this man actually is. The plaza was starting to fill up with the lunch rush. Secretaries, lawyers, and construction workers were pausing, sandwiches in hand, watching the scene unfold. A young woman in a business suit stopped about 20 feet away and held up her phone. She started recording. Thorne noticed her and gave a barely perceptible nod. "You're making this difficult," Braden said, stepping into Thorne's personal space. "I'm making this constitutional," Thorne corrected. "You are the one making it difficult. Last chance. ID or handcuffs. Make your choice, officer, but make sure you're ready for the paperwork that comes with it." Officer Braden looked at the growing crowd. He saw the phones pointed at him. In his mind, backing down now would look like weakness. It would look like he had lost control of the situation. He had been on the force for 6 years, and he had learned the wrong lessons from the wrong veterans. He believed that respect was something you demanded, not something you earned. "Stand up and turn around," Braden barked, unlatching the retention strap on his holster, though he didn't draw the weapon. He kept his hand resting on it, a threat display. Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. "Officer, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are currently detaining me. Under Terry versus Ohio, you need reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Looking suspicious is not a crime. Sitting on a bench is not a crime. If you put your hands on me, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. Do you understand that?" "I don't need a law lecture from a vagrant," Braden sneered. "I'm detaining you for loitering and disorderly conduct." "Disorderly?" Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't used profanity. I haven't blocked pedestrian traffic. The only person creating disorder here is you. You are escalating a non-event into a civil rights violation. You're refusing to identify during an investigation." Braden countered, reciting a line he had used 100 times to bully compliance out of teenagers. "Heibel versus 6th Judicial District Court." Thorne cited the case law as effortlessly as if he were ordering coffee. "State statutes requiring identification only apply if the stop itself is lawful. Your stop is based on a hunch, not facts. Therefore, the stop is unlawful and I have no duty to identify myself. You are fishing officer, and you're about to catch a shark." The woman recording the video stepped a little closer. "He's right, officer," she called out. "He's just sitting there. Leave him alone." "Back up!" Braden yelled, pointing a finger at the woman. "Do not interfere with police business." "She's 20 feet away, officer," Thorne said calmly. "She has a First Amendment right to record public officials in the course of their duties. Glick versus Cuniff. You really need to brush up on your case law before you go out on patrol." Braden had heard enough. This man, this arrogant, disheveled man, was embarrassing him. Braden didn't see a citizen exercising his rights. He saw a nail that needed hammering. He convinced himself that the man must be wanted. Why else would he be so protective of his ID? He probably had a warrant. Maybe he was a fugitive. Braden's bias filled in the gaps where evidence should have been. "I'm done talking," Braden said. He lunged forward, grabbing Thorne's left arm. Thorne didn't pull away, but his body went rigid. "I do not consent to this search or seizure," he stated loudly, ensuring the phone microphones picked it up. "I am not resisting, but I am not consenting." "Stop tensing up," Braden shouted, twisting Thorne's arm behind his back with unnecessary force. "I have a rotator cuff injury from service," Thorne said, through gritted teeth, the pain flaring up immediately. "If you wrench that arm, you will cause permanent damage." "Then you should have showed me your ID," Braden retorted, shoving Thorne's chest against the rough concrete of the fountain wall. "Officer," Thorne said, his face pressed against the stone, "you are making a career-ending mistake. I am giving you one last chance to walk away. Release me, apologize, and we can call this a misunderstanding." "You're under arrest," Braden announced, pulling his handcuffs from their case. "For what crime?" Thorne asked. "Obstruction of justice," Braden said, snapping the first cuff onto Thorne's left wrist. "There it is," Thorne whispered to himself. "The catch-all charge for a cop with a bruised ego." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was distinct. Click, click, click. It was a sound that usually signaled the end of a confrontation, the moment when police authority became absolute. But in this case, it was the sound of a fuse being lit on a stick of dynamite. Officer Braden yanked Thorne's right arm back. Thorne winced a sharp intake of breath, his only sign of pain as the metal bit into his wrists. Braden didn't bother checking for spacing. He didn't double-lock the cuffs. He just wanted this man secured and humiliated. "You're hurting him," the woman filming screamed. "He told you he has an injury. Step back or you're next." Braden threatened the crowd. By now, 15 or 20 people had gathered. They weren't just watching, they were judging. And the verdict wasn't going in Braden's favor. Braden patted Thorne down roughly. He reached into Thorne's back pocket and pulled out a slim black leather wallet. "Now we'll see who you are," Braden muttered triumphantly. "That is an illegal search." Thorne stated, his voice tight with pain but still commanded. "You have arrested me for obstruction, which is a secondary charge. You never established the primary crime. The search incident to arrest is fruit of the poisonous tree. Nothing you find in there is admissible, but everything you find is going to scare the hell out of you." Braden didn't open the wallet immediately. He shoved it into his own pocket, wanting to savor the reveal at the station. He wanted to process this guy, throw him in a holding cell, and let him think about respect for a few hours. "Let's go," Braden said, grabbing Thorne by the bicep and marching him toward the patrol car parked illegally on the curb. Thorne walked with dignity. He didn't shuffle. He didn't hang his head. He walked with the upright posture of a man who had marched in formation for 30 years. He looked at the camera as he passed the woman recording. "Thank you, ma'am," Thorne said to her. "Please don't stop recording until we leave." "I got you," she promised. "I'm posting this right now." Braden opened the back door of his cruiser and shoved Thorne inside. The back of a police interceptor is designed to be uncomfortable. The hard plastic seat forces the body into an unnatural position, especially with hands cuffed behind the back. Thorne had to twist his torso to fit his legs in. Braden slammed the door shut, sealing Thorne inside the plexiglass cage. Braden walked around to the driver's side. He paused to glare at the crowd one last time. "Show's over," he yelled. "Go about your business." "You should be ashamed of yourself," an older man in a construction vest yelled back. He wasn't doing anything. Braden got into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The interior smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and sweat. He took a deep breath, his adrenaline still pumping. He felt good. He felt powerful. He had taken a problem off the street. He looked in the rearview mirror. Thorne was sitting perfectly still, staring right at the back of Braden's head. Thorne's eyes weren't angry. They were calculating. It was the look a predator gives prey before the strike. "Comfortable back there," Braden taunted. "Comfort is irrelevant, officer," Thorne replied. "What matters now is documentation. I hope your body camera is active. I hope your dash cam is rolling, because I'm going to subpoena every second of data this vehicle produces." "You talk a lot for a guy in cuffs," Braden laughed, putting the car in gear. "And you think very little for a man with a badge," Thorne countered. Braden pulled away from the curb, hitting the lights, but not the siren. He wanted to get this guy to the precinct fast. He had a nagging feeling in the back of his mind, a tiny voice telling him that the man's confidence was too real. Most people begged. Most people cried. Most people got angry and shouted obscenities. Thorne did none of that. He was behaving like he was the one in charge, even from the back seat. As they drove, Braden's hand brushed against the wallet in his pocket. He was tempted to look at it while driving, but he decided to wait. He wanted to do it in front of the guys at the station. He wanted to show them the sovereign citizen nut job he had just brought in. He had no idea that the drive to the station was the last time he would ever drive a police vehicle. The drive to the 4th Precinct took 12 minutes. For Officer Braden, it was a victory lap. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, rehearsing how he would write the report. Subject was belligerent, refused lawful order, suspected casing of high-value retail targets. He could spin it. He always spun it. In the back seat, Marcus Thorne closed his eyes and practiced tactical breathing. In for 4 hold, for 4, out for 4. He needed to lower his heart rate. The pain in his shoulder was a dull, throbbing fire radiating down to his elbow. He knew the injury well. He had earned it in the Persian Gulf in 1991, pulling a pilot out of a burning wreckage. The VA had rebuilt the shoulder, but it wasn't designed to be wrenched behind his back by an overzealous patrolman. Thorne didn't speak again. He knew the value of silence. In the military, he had learned that information was ammunition. He wasn't going to give Braden any more ammo. He was just going to let the officer dig the hole deeper. Braden kept glancing in the mirror, expecting Thorne to start complaining or bargaining. The silence unnerved him more than the insults would have. "You got a name, or are you going to make me wait?" Braden asked. Silence. "Suit yourself. We'll fingerprint you. We'll find out who you are. Probably got a long sheet, huh? That's why you didn't want to show ID. Outstanding warrants." Silence. Braden turned up the radio to drown out the quiet. He was starting to sweat again. Why was the guy so calm? Even the hardened gangbangers usually swore at him by now. This guy sat with the discipline of a statue. They pulled into the sally port of the precinct. The heavy metal gate rolled down behind them, shutting out the sunlight. The artificial hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Braden parked the car and got out. He opened the back door and hauled Thorne out. Thorne stumbled slightly as his legs woke up, but he regained his balance instantly. "Watch your head," Braden said, a mockery of politeness as he guided Thorne toward the booking intake. They walked through the heavy steel doors into the processing area. It was a busy afternoon. 2 other officers were booking a shoplifter. The smell of bleach and old fear hung in the air. Behind the high intake desk sat Sergeant Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran of the force. He was tired, he was close to retirement, and he had zero patience for nonsense. He had seen good cops and bad cops, and he knew Braden was a hothead. "What you got, Braden?" Miller asked, not looking up from his computer screen. "Refusal to ID, obstruction, disorderly," Braden announced proudly. "Guy was loitering at the fountain, acting suspicious, refused to comply." Miller looked up. He saw Thorne. He saw the way Thorne stood, feet shoulder-width apart, chin-up eyes scanning the room. Miller saw the faded military field jacket. He saw the haircut, high and tight gray, but neat. Miller frowned. That's it, he wouldn't show ID. He was belligerent Sarge, causing a scene. Thorne spoke for the first time since entering the building. "Sergeant, I request medical attention for a service-connected shoulder injury aggravated by this officer's use of force, and I request you secure this officer's body camera footage immediately." Miller's eyes narrowed. That wasn't the way a vagrant spoke. That was the way a commanding officer spoke. "Get his property," Miller said to Braden, his voice dropping an octave. Braden pulled the wallet out of his pocket and tossed it onto the counter. "Here. Let's see who the mystery man is." Miller picked up the wallet. It was high-quality leather old, but well cared for. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a standard driver's license. Marcus Aurelius Thorne. The second thing he saw was a folded laminated card. A Department of Defense retired identification. Rank Captain 06, United States Navy. Miller paused. A Navy captain was a big deal. That was equivalent to a full-bird colonel in the Army. That was a serious rank. But then Miller flipped the flap of the wallet. Behind a clear plastic window was another card. It was white with a blue strip. It identified Marcus Thorne as a senior strategic consultant for the Pentagon, with a security clearance level that Miller had only seen in movies, and tucked behind that was a small metal card. It was a replica of a medal something veterans sometimes carried. A silver star. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the cards. He looked at Thorne. He looked at Braden, who was leaning against the counter, smirking. "Braden," Miller whispered. "Yeah, Sarge. Who is he? Some sovereign citizen nut." "Braden, shut up." Miller said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. "Uncuff him." "What?" "I said uncuff him. Right now." Miller roared, standing up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. The booking room went silent. The other officers stopped what they were doing. Everyone looked at Sergeant Miller, whose face had gone from pale to a dangerous shade of purple. "Sarge, he's under arrest," Braden protested, confused. He obstructed. You enter these codes into the system, Braden, and you'll be lucky if you're working security at a mall by next week. Miller snapped. He walked around the desk, keyring in hand, and approached Thorne himself. Captain Thorne, Miller said, his voice respectful, almost apologetic. I am Sergeant Miller. I served in the Corps 85 to 89. I am removing these cuffs immediately. Thank you, Sergeant, Thorne said calmly. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his hands forward slowly, wincing as he rotated his shoulders. His wrists were red and welting where the metal had dug in. Braden, Miller barked, not taking his eyes off Thorne. Give me your body cam, now. Sarge, I don't understand. Read the damn ID, you moron. Miller shoved the wallet toward Braden. Braden picked up the wallet. He looked at the driver's license. Okay, so he had a house. Big deal. He looked at the military ID. Captain U.S. Navy, retired. He frowned. He didn't know military ranks well. He's a captain, Braden shrugged. So what, he still has to follow the law? 06, Thorne said softly. That means I commanded ships, Officer Braden. I commanded thousands of sailors. I managed budgets larger than this entire city's GDP. And I know the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the U.S. Constitution better than you know the back of your hand. Braden flipped to the next card. Department of Defense, Pentagon Liaison. Braden's throat went dry. And the Silver Star, Miller added, pointing to the metal card. Do you know what that is, Braden? That's for gallantry in action. This man is a war hero. He looked homeless. Braden stammered, his defense crumbling. He was wearing that old jacket. It's a field jacket, Miller spat. It's issued gear. Braden, you profiled a high-ranking federal consultant and a decorated veteran as a vagrant because he was sitting at a fountain. Thorne rubbed his wrists. Sergeant Miller, I want the watch commander down here. Now. And I want the city attorney on the phone. This officer didn't just profile me. He unlawfully detained me, assaulted me, and kidnapped me. I use those words specifically because without probable cause, an arrest is a kidnapping. Braden took a step back. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him. This wasn't a guy he could bully. This wasn't someone who would take a plea deal to go home. This was a man who had literally fought wars. I was following protocol. Braden tried, but his voice was weak. No, Thorne said, turning his gaze on Braden. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You were following your bias. You saw a black man in casual clothes and you assumed criminality. You assumed I was nobody. You assumed I couldn't fight back. Thorne stepped closer to Braden. You assumed wrong. Sarge, call the captain, Miller instructed the dispatch officer. Tell him it's a code red situation in booking. Tell him we have a VIP in custody erroneously. I'm not a VIP, Sergeant, Thorne corrected gently. I'm a citizen. That should have been enough. The doors to the booking area swung open. Captain Reynolds, the precinct commander, walked in. He looked annoyed at being disturbed, but when he saw Marcus Thorne standing there rubbing his wrists and Sergeant Miller looking like he was about to have a stroke, his expression changed instantly. Captain Reynolds knew Marcus Thorne. They served on the Veterans Affairs Civic Board together. Marcus, Reynolds said, stopping in his tracks. What the hell is going on? Hello, David, Thorne said. Your officer here decided that sitting at a fountain while black is a crime in this city. Reynolds looked at Braden. The look was not one of anger. It was one of absolute devastation. It was the look a father gives a child who has just burned down the house. Braden, Reynolds said quietly. In my office. Now. Give your badge and gun to Sergeant Miller. The sound of Officer Braden placing his gun and badge on the counter was the loudest sound in the room. Clack, clack. He looked stripped naked without the symbols of his authority. He walked past Thorne's eyes on the floor and disappeared into the captain's office. Captain Reynolds turned to Thorne. "Marcus, I can't even find the words. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Do you need a medic?" "I'll see my own doctor, David," Thorne said. "But we need to handle the procedural matters right now." "Of course. We'll drop all charges, obviously. It's a misunderstanding. I'll drive you home myself." "No." Thorne raised a hand. "You're not dropping the charges because of a misunderstanding. You're dropping them because they were fabricated. And I'm not going home yet. I want a copy of the booking log before it's deleted. I want the intake form. I want a preservation letter signed by you guaranteeing that Braden's body cam, dash cam, and the precinct security footage are locked down." Reynolds sighed. He knew what this was. This was the prelude to a lawsuit. "Marcus, come on. We can handle this internally. Braden is done. I promise you that. We don't need to make this a federal case." "It already is a federal case," Thorne said. "Violation of civil rights under color of law. Title 42, Section 1983. You know the code, David." "Think about the department," Reynolds pleaded softly. "We're trying to rebuild trust." "That is exactly why I'm doing this," Thorne replied. "You don't build trust by sweeping this under the rug. You build trust by showing the public that when your officers mess up, they face the same music as the rest of us. If I had been a 19-year-old kid with no resources, I'd be in a cell right now. I'd be taking a plea deal for disorderly conduct just to get out. I'd have a record. I'd lose my job." Thorne pointed to the door where Braden had exited. He didn't care about any of that. He wanted to dominate. He wanted to hurt. And he did it because he thought he was untouchable. Reynolds nodded slowly. He knew Thorne was right. "Okay. I'll get the paperwork. I'll sign the preservation order. And I want my phone," Thorne said. "I need to call my attorney." "Who's your attorney?" Reynolds asked, dreading the answer. "Alan Dershowitz's former partner," Thorne said. "He specializes in excessive force cases." Reynolds winced. "Right. Okay, here's your phone." Thorne took the phone. He saw a notification. The video from the woman in the park had been posted on Twitter/X. It had been up for 45 minutes. "David," Thorne said, holding up the screen, "you might want to call the mayor. This video already has 50,000 views." Reynolds looked at the screen. The caption read, "San Diego police assault and arrest elderly black veteran for sitting on a bench. #police brutality. #veterans. "Oh no," Reynolds whispered. "The train has left the station," Thorne said. "Now we see where it crashes." Reynolds went into his office to deal with Braden. Thorne stood in the booking room surrounded by officers who wouldn't meet his eyes. He wasn't angry anymore. He was on a mission. He had served his country overseas defending freedom. Now he was serving his community right here defending the same thing. By the time Marcus Thorne got home that evening, the video had 2 million views. By the next morning, it was on Good Morning America. The visual was undeniable. A calm, older black man sitting peacefully contrasted with a young, aggressive white officer escalating the situation for absolutely no reason. The internet detectives went to work. They identified Braden within hours. They found his old social media posts, which were filled with aggressive sheepdog rhetoric and complaints about soft-on-crime policies. But the real damage came from the lawsuit filed 3 days later. Thorne's lawyer didn't hold back. The complaint was 40 pages long. It detailed every constitutional violation, the unlawful stop, the refusal to accept the lack of reasonable suspicion, the excessive force used on a disabled veteran, the false arrest. But the lawsuit also dug into Braden's history. It turned out this wasn't an isolated incident. Braden had 5 previous complaints for aggressive conduct. 4 of them were against minority men. 1 was against a Hispanic Gulf War veteran. All of them had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded or within policy. The city attorney, A woman named Sarah Jenkins sat in a conference room with the police chief and watched the body cam footage. She watched Braden taunt Thorne in the car. She watched the arrest. "We can't defend this," Jenkins said, tossing the file onto the table. "He detained a man for sitting. The man cited the correct case law and the officer arrested him out of spite. And the victim is a Navy captain with a Silver Star. Jurors will hate us. They will give him whatever number he asks for. We have to support our officers," the union rep tried to argue. "We support officers who follow the law," Jenkins shot back. "Braden went rogue. He didn't have reasonable suspicion. He admitted it on camera. He said, 'We had a call, but dispatch logs show no call.' He lied. That's Brady material. He's finished as a witness in any court. We have to settle." The media pressure was suffocating. Veterans groups were protesting outside the precinct. The NAACP issued a blistering statement. The Pentagon even released a generic statement about expecting our service members and veterans to be treated with dignity. The headline on the local paper read, "Hero in Handcuffs, How SDPD Profiled a Captain." The city of San Diego couldn't make it go away. They offered $500,000. Thorne rejected it. They offered $750,000. Thorne rejected it. "It's not about the money," Thorne told the press on the courthouse steps. "It's about the cost. If it's cheap to violate rights, they'll keep doing it. It has to be expensive. It has to hurt the city budget so much that they are forced to train their officers better." The discovery phase of the trial revealed that Braden's supervisor had actually warned him about his aggression months prior, but hadn't formally reprimanded him. That opened the door for Manel liability failure to train and supervise. The city realized that if this went to a jury with a Silver Star recipient on the stand, the verdict could be $5 or $10 million. They folded. 6 months after the incident, the settlement was finalized. The city agreed to pay Marcus Thorne $1.3 million. But the money was just part of the deal. The consent decree required the department to overhaul its stop and ID training. Every officer had to watch the video of Thorne's arrest as an example of what not to do. Officer Kyle Braden was terminated for cause. He lost his pension. He lost his certification. He would never be a police officer again. On a crisp autumn Tuesday, Marcus Thorne returned to the plaza. He walked to the same concrete bench near the fountain. He was wearing the same green field jacket. He sat down. He placed his hands on his knees. He listened to the water. A young rookie officer walked by on foot patrol. He saw Thorne sitting there. The officer paused, looked at Thorne, and nodded respectfully. "Morning, sir," the officer said. "Good morning, officer," Thorne replied. The officer kept walking. That was the victory, not the money. The money, all $1.3 million of it, Thorne had already signed over to the Veterans Legal Defense Fund and the local Innocence Project. He didn't keep a dime. He didn't need it. He had his pension, he had his consultancy work, and he had his dignity. Thorne watched the water dance in the sunlight. He thought about Braden. He didn't hate the young man. He pitied him. Braden had traded his honor for a moment of power, and he had lost everything. Thorne looked directly at you, the viewer. His eyes were kind but intense, filled with the wisdom of a man who has seen the best and worst of humanity. "Rights are like muscles," Thorne said softly. "If you don't exercise them, they atrophy. If you don't defend them, you lose them. I fought for this country's constitution overseas. I wasn't about to let it be trampled on in a parking lot at home. Freedom isn't free, but it also isn't a gift from the government. It's yours. You just have to be willing to stand up for it." He stood up, adjusting his cap. "So I have to ask you," Thorne continued, "what is your freedom worth? Is it worth an awkward conversation? Is it worth a pair of handcuffs? Because if you aren't willing to say no when they cross the line, then you've already surrendered." That is the story of how a patrolman tried to bully a vagrant and ended up battling a captain. It cost the city $1.3 million, but it bought a lesson that was priceless. What do you think? Was $1.3 million enough for the humiliation of a war hero? Or should the city have paid more? And do you think officers like Braden should face criminal charges, not just firing? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you proud of our veterans, please hit the like button and share this with a friend. We need to keep telling these stories until the system changes. Stay safe, stay free, and thanks for watching.
Last warning, get on the ground now!
Officer, I am unarmed. I'm complying. Will not lie on this concrete.
You don't get to decide! Down now!
Look at my hands. Look at your camera.
Turn around! Hands behind your back!
I'm not resisting.
Officer, you are making a catastrophic error in judgment. I am a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I am unarmed. I am complying with your request to keep my hands visible, but I will not lay on this concrete. Last warning, get on the ground. The young officer, red-faced and shaking with a mix of adrenaline and rage, didn't care about the calm baritone voice of the man standing before him. He didn't care that the man was dressed in a clean gray tracksuit and expensive running shoes. All Officer Kyle Braden saw was a large black man standing on a sidewalk where he decided he didn't belong, refusing to submit to his authority. Braden, 29 years old and only 3 years onto the force, felt his ego shrinking with every second this man remained standing. He holstered his taser and reached for his baton. But what Officer Braden didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know because he hadn't bothered to ask a single investigative question, was that the man he was threatening to beat into submission was Marcus Thorne. And Marcus Thorne had spent 20 years leading men into combat zones where discipline and rules of engagement actually mattered. He had survived IEDs in Iraq and ambushes in Afghanistan. He had retired with a Silver Star and a Purple Heart. And right now, he wasn't casing a business. He was waiting to pick up his dress blues for the funeral of a fellow soldier. The woman across the street, a nurse ending her night shift, had already started recording. She saw exactly what was happening. A calm, older black man standing like a statue, and a young, aggressive officer escalating a situation that shouldn't have even existed. Officer Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. The command voice that had once directed battalions now focused entirely on one out-of-control patrolman. Look at my hands. They are empty. Look at my demeanor. I am not a threat. Take a breath and think about your next move, because your body camera is blinking and you are about to violate my Fourth Amendment rights in a way that will end your career. Braden didn't listen. He lunged. Before we see how this absolute travesty of justice unfolds, and believe me, it gets much worse before it gets better, I need you to do something for me. Go down to the comments section right now and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who is out there paying attention to these stories. And if you believe that a man who served his country for 2 decades deserves better than being treated like a criminal on a street corner, hit that subscribe button. You need to see how this ends. The impact was sudden. Braden grabbed Marcus's arm, twisting it behind his back with force that was entirely unnecessary. Marcus didn't fight back. He didn't pull away. He knew that any movement, any flinch, would be used as justification for a beatdown, or worse. He let his arm be twisted. He felt the old shrapnel injury in his shoulder flare up with blinding pain, but he bit the inside of his cheek and remained silent. "Stop resisting!" Braden screamed for the benefit of the camera, a rehearsed line used to justify force against a compliant subject. "I am not resisting," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "I am submitting to an unlawful arrest under duress." "Shut up. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and failure to obey." Braden slammed the handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists. He squeezed them tight, too tight. He wanted to hurt him. He wanted to punish him for that calm, authoritative tone. Marcus Thorne, who had commanded thousands of soldiers and negotiated with tribal leaders in active war zones, was now being shoved against the hood of a police cruiser by a man who looked like he hadn't started shaving when Marcus was already a major. The irony was bitter, but Marcus pushed it down. He switched into tactical mode. Observe. Remember. Document. To understand how we got to this point of absolute insanity, we have to rewind about 15 minutes. It was a Tuesday morning around 10 a.m. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. It was the kind of day that makes you glad to be alive. The neighborhood was a quiet, mixed-use area with small businesses and coffee shops. It wasn't a high-crime area. It wasn't a hot spot. It was just a place where people lived and worked. Marcus Thorne had arrived at Spotless Cleaners at 9:55 a.m. He parked his pristine 2022 Ford F-150, the kind of truck that costs $70,000 legally, in the marked stall in front of the shop. He got out, checked the door, and saw the handwritten sign, "Back in 15 minutes. Family emergency." It was an inconvenience, sure, but Marcus wasn't a man who got angry over small things. He had seen too much of the world to lose his temper over a delayed dry cleaner. He decided to wait. He leaned against the brick wall of the building, enjoying the morning sun. He pulled out his smartphone to check his emails. He was currently serving as a civilian consultant for veteran housing projects, and there was always work to do. He was wearing his workout clothes, a gray hoodie, black sweatpants, and high-end running shoes. He looked like exactly what he was, a fit, middle-aged man taking a break. But to some people, a black man in a hoodie standing on a corner is never just a man standing on a corner. Officer Kyle Braden turned onto the street at 10:05 a.m. Braden was bored. He was looking for activity. In police culture, especially for younger officers trying to make a name for themselves, activity meant stops, citations, and arrests. It meant showing your sergeant that you were working. Braden saw the black man leaning against the wall. He saw the hoodie. He saw the expensive truck and assumed, based on nothing but his own prejudice, that the two didn't go together. He slowed his cruiser to a crawl. He watched Marcus. Marcus looked up from his phone, made brief eye contact, and went back to reading his email. That was the trigger. In Braden's mind, the lack of fear, the lack of deference was suspicious. Why wasn't this guy nervous? Why wasn't he leaving? Braden pulled the cruiser to the curb, blocking part of the driveway. He put the car in park and stepped out. He didn't adjust his hat or offer a wave. He dropped his hand to rest near his holster, a subtle threat that every black man in America recognizes instantly. "Hey, you," Braden called out. "What are you doing here?" Marcus looked up slowly. He didn't smile, but he wasn't aggressive. He was just calm. "Good morning, officer. I'm waiting for the dry cleaner to open." "Shop's closed," Braden said, walking closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "I'm aware. The sign says they'll be back shortly." "You live around here?" Braden asked. The classic fishing expedition. If he says yes, ask for the address. If he says no, ask what he's doing in this neighborhood. Marcus sighed internally. He knew this game. He had given lectures to young soldiers about how to interact with civilians, how not to be this guy. "Officer, is there a problem? Am I blocking the sidewalk?" "I asked you a question," Braden snapped. "Do you live around here?" "And I answered you." Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I'm waiting for a business to open. That's a lawful activity." Braden didn't like that. He was used to fear. He was used to, "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." He wasn't used to a man standing his ground with the confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are. "You're loitering," Braden said. "Loitering requires intent to commit a crime or obstructing public passage." Marcus corrected him. "I am doing neither. I am a customer waiting for a service." "Let me see your ID," Braden demanded. This was the pivot point. This was the moment where everything could have been de-escalated if Officer Braden had just an ounce of common sense or respect for the law he was sworn to uphold. But he didn't. And Marcus Thorne, a man of principle, wasn't about to surrender his rights just to make a bully feel better. "Officer," Marcus said, placing his phone in his pocket but keeping his hand visible, "I am not going to provide my identification. You have not articulated a reasonable suspicion that I have committed a crime, am committing a crime, or am about to commit a crime. Under Terry versus Ohio and state statutes, I am not required to identify myself during a consensual encounter. Braden's face flushed a deep crimson. To him, the mention of case law wasn't a valid legal point. It was an insult. It was a challenge. You don't tell me the law, pal. I'm the police. I'm investigating a suspicious person report. There is no report, Marcus said calmly. I've been here for 10 minutes. You just drove up. No one called you. You saw a black man standing still and you decided to fish. That's not reasonable suspicion. That's profiling. We've had break-ins in this area. Braden lied. It was the standard fabrication used to justify unlawful stops. You fit the description of a suspect. What description? Marcus pressed. Male black hoodie that describes half the city on a Saturday morning. Be specific, officer. What specific articulable facts connect me to a specific crime? Braden stepped closer, his chest puffed out, trying to physically intimidate a man who had stared down warlords. You're refusing a lawful order. Now you're obstructing an investigation. Give me your ID or you're going to jail. For what? Marcus asked. For standing on a public sidewalk, for waiting for my dry cleaning. You are escalating a non-event into a civil rights violation. I strongly suggest you call your supervisor. I don't need a supervisor to handle a vagrant. Braden sneered. A vagrant? Marcus actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. Officer, that truck right there is mine. I have the keys in my pocket. I have a ticket for this dry cleaner in my other pocket. I am a retired field-grade officer of the United States Army. If you arrest me, you are going to regret it. Braden's hand went to his radio, but not to call a supervisor. He clicked the mic. Dispatch, show me out with a non-compliant subject at the Spotless Cleaners. Male is being belligerent, requesting backup. I am not belligerent, Marcus said, speaking clearly so the body camera and the growing number of witnesses could hear. I am asserting my rights. There is a difference. Turn around, Braden barked. I'm detaining you until we figure out who you are. I am not consenting to a search, Marcus stated. I am not consenting to a seizure. I am free to go unless I am under arrest. Am I under arrest? You're about to be, Braden shouted. Get on the ground now. I have already told you, Marcus said, his voice hard as steel. I have a service-connected disability in my knees. I cannot get on the ground. I will not get on the ground. I am standing here peaceful and compliant with safety instructions, but I will not degrade myself because you have an ego problem. Braden drew his baton. The metal hissed as it expanded. I'm done asking, get down. Have you ever tried to reason with someone who has absolute power and zero wisdom? It's a dangerous place to be. Marcus knew the physics of the situation. He could disarm this child in about 3 seconds. Muscle memory from 20 years of hand-to-hand combat training was twitching in his nerves. But he also knew that if he so much as touched the officer, he would be shot, and the headline would read, Officer Involved Shooting a Violent Suspect. He had to win this with his mind, not his hands. Officer, Marcus said, look at the woman recording you across the street. Look at the man in the bakery window with his phone out. The world is watching you right now. Braden glanced around, seeing the phones. Panic flickered in his eyes, but it quickly turned back to anger. He couldn't back down now. He had committed. Hands behind your back. Do it now. The scuffle that followed was ugly brief and completely one-sided. Braden holstered the baton and rushed Marcus, grabbing his left wrist and wrenching it upward. It was a control hold designed to inflict pain to force the body to bow forward. Marcus grunted as his shoulder rebuilt with titanium pins after an IED blast in 2008 screamed in protest. I am not resisting, Marcus shouted, his voice booming down the street. I am allowing you to handcuff me. Stop twisting my arm. Stop fighting, Braden yelled back, breathless and frantic, fighting a ghost. He shoved Marcus against the brick wall of the dry cleaners. Marcus's cheeks scraped against the rough masonry. He didn't struggle. He planted his feet and let the officer manhandle him, ensuring that every ounce of aggression came from the badge, not the veteran. 2 more police cruisers screeched onto the scene, sirens chirping. Officers spilled out hands on their weapons. They saw a uniformed officer wrestling with a large black man and immediately assumed the worst. They rushed in. "He's got a weapon." Braden lied, panicking. "Watch his waistband." 3 officers grabbed Marcus. They slammed him onto the hood of Braden's car. The heat of the engine radiated through the metal. "I am unarmed," Marcus yelled. "Check my pockets. I have a phone and keys. That is it." One of the new officers, an older sergeant named Miller, quickly patted Marcus's waist. "He's clear, no weapon," Miller shouted, looking at Braden with confusion. "Braden, what do you have?" He was casing the store, refused ID, resisting arrest. Braden was panting, sweat dripping down his face. "He's in cuffs. Kyle, ease up." Sergeant Miller pulled Braden back. Miller looked at Marcus. He saw the gray hair, the calm eyes, the quality of the clothes. He saw the lack of panic. Miller's gut tightened. He had been a cop for 25 years. He knew the difference between a criminal and a mistake. This felt like a mistake. "Sir," Miller said to Marcus, who was now double-locked in cuffs and leaning against the cruiser, "are you injured?" "My shoulder is surgically reconstructed," Marcus said, his voice regaining that icy calm. "Your officer just tried to tear it out of the socket. I told him I was a disabled veteran. He didn't care." Miller looked at Braden. Braden looked away. "Get him in the car," Braden said defensively. "I'm taking him in. Failure to identify. Resisting. Disorderly." Miller hesitated. "You sure about this, Braden? What was the PC probable cause for the stop?" "Suspicious behavior," Braden insisted. "He wouldn't answer questions." Miller looked at Marcus again. Marcus met his gaze. "Sergeant," Marcus said, "my wallet is in my back right pocket. Before you let him drive me away, I suggest you look at who you are arresting." "We'll do that at booking," Braden interrupted, grabbing Marcus by the arm and shoving him toward the back seat. "Get in." Marcus had to twist his body painfully to fit into the cramped plastic seat of the patrol car. The door slammed shut, sealing him in. The smell of stale vomit and industrial disinfectant filled his nose. He leaned his head back against the plexiglass divider. He closed his eyes. He had fought for the freedom of people in countries most Americans couldn't find on a map. He had buried friends who died wearing the American flag on their shoulders. And now, on a sunny Tuesday morning, he was caged like an animal because he dared to wait for his dry cleaning while black. The rage was there deep in his gut, burning like a coal, but he suffocated it. Rage wouldn't help him now. Discipline would. He opened his eyes and watched Officer Braden get into the driver's seat. Braden adjusted the rearview mirror, catching Marcus's eye. Braden smirked. It was a look of triumph. "I won. You lost." "You made a big mistake, pal," Braden said. "Officer," Marcus said softly, "you have no idea." The drive to the precinct was short, maybe 10 minutes. Braden didn't speak again. He turned up the radio, blasting talk radio, trying to drown out the silence coming from the back seat. He was pumping himself up, rehearsing the narrative he would write in his report. Subject was hostile. Subject took a fighting stance. Subject refused lawful commands. He was building a castle of lies to protect his pension. When they arrived at the precinct, Braden pulled into the sally port. The heavy garage door rumbled shut behind them, cutting off the sunlight. Braden hauled Marcus out of the car. "Walk," Braden commanded. They entered the processing area. It was a sterile room with linoleum floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed. There were benches with metal loops for handcuffs. A high desk stood at the front where the watch commander sat. The watch commander on duty was Sergeant Thomas Mac Mackenzie. Mac was 55 years old, a former Marine, and a man who took no nonsense. He was typing a report when Braden walked in with Marcus. Mac looked up. He saw Braden looking disheveled and aggressive. Then he looked at the prisoner. Mac stopped typing. He squinted. "Braden," Mac said, his voice suspicious. "What do we have here?" "Disorderly conduct resisting failure to ID," Braden rattled off. "Guy was acting crazy at the shopping center on 5th. Refused to comply." Mac stood up. He walked around the desk. He looked at Marcus. Marcus stood tall despite the handcuffs. He looked Mac in the eye. "Permission to speak, Sergeant," Marcus said. It was a military courtesy, a reflex. Mac's eyes widened. He recognized the cadence. "Go ahead." "I am Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thorne, United States Army retired. I request that you remove these handcuffs immediately and call the Chief of Police." Braden laughed. "Yeah, and I'm the King of England. He's a loiterer sarge. He wouldn't even give me a name." Mac ignored Braden. He walked up to Marcus. "Thorne," Mac asked, "you the one who runs the Veteran Outreach Program? The one who sits on the Civilian Oversight Commission?" "That is correct," Marcus said. The color drained from Braden's face so fast it looked like he was about to faint. The room went dead silent. The Civilian Oversight Commission wasn't just a volunteer group. They had the power to subpoena police records. They were the body that investigated police misconduct. "Braden," Mac said, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you search him?" "Just a pat down for weapons," Braden stammered. Mac walked behind Marcus. "I'm going to reach into your pocket, Colonel." "Go ahead, Sergeant." Mac pulled out the wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the blue Department of Defense retiree ID card with the rank Lieutenant Colonel. The second thing he saw was the heavy gold badge of the City Oversight Commissioner. Mac looked at the ID. He looked at the badge. He looked at Braden. "You arrested a commissioner," Mac whispered. "You arrested a colonel for... what exactly?" He wouldn't show ID," Braden said, his voice cracking. "He was acting suspicious." Mac closed the wallet. He took a deep breath. He didn't yell. It was worse than yelling. He looked at Braden with pure disappointment. "Uncuff him," Mac said. "But Sarge, the paperwork..." "Uncuff him now!" Mac roared, the Marine Corps coming out of him. "And then give me your badge and your gun and get in the captain's office. Do not pass go. Do not speak to anyone." Braden's hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs. As soon as the metal clicked open, Marcus brought his hands forward. He rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had bitten into his skin. "Colonel," Mac said, "I am incredibly sorry. I don't know what to say." Marcus looked at Braden, who was shrinking into the corner. "Don't apologize for him, Sergeant," Marcus said. "Just get me the chief, and preserve every second of that body camera footage, because if one frame of it goes missing, I will own this entire building." Chief Robert Harrison arrived 20 minutes later. He had been at a Rotary Club lunch when the call came in from Sergeant Mackenzie. The message was brief. "Braden arrested Commissioner Thorne. It's bad. Get here." When Harrison walked into the station, the atmosphere was like a funeral. Officers were whispering in corners. Braden was sequestered in an interrogation room without his weapon. Marcus was sitting in the sergeant's office nursing a cup of coffee, his dress blues claim ticket sitting on the desk next to his phone. Harrison, a man of 60 with graying temples and a reputation for being a reformer, walked straight to Marcus. He didn't offer a handshake. He knew better than to touch a man who had just been assaulted by his staff. He stood at attention. "Colonel Thorne," Harrison said. "I am mortified." "Chief," Marcus nodded. He didn't stand up. "You have a problem with your personnel." "I know," Harrison said. "We've reviewed the footage already." Mackenzie pulled it. "I watched it in the car on the way here." "And?" And it's defenseless, Harrison admitted. There was no probable cause. The stop was bad from the first second. The escalation was unlawful. The use of force was excessive. He twisted my arm, Bob, Marcus said, using the chief's first name. They had met at charity events. I have a screwed-up shoulder from an IED in 08. Your boy tried to rip it off because I told him the law. Harrison winced. I'm so sorry, Marcus. We are dropping all charges immediately. Obviously, you are free to go. We'll drive you back to your car. We'll handle Braden internally. Marcus set his coffee cup down. The ceramic clinked loudly on the desk. No, Marcus said. Harrison paused. No? I'm not just walking out of here, Bob. If I walk out of here with a sorry and a ride home, that kid gets a slap on the wrist, maybe a suspension. Then he's back on the street in 2 weeks doing this to some kid who doesn't have a rank, who doesn't have a badge, who doesn't know the law. That kid ends up with a resisting charge that ruins his life. Or worse, he ends up dead. Marcus stood up then, wincing slightly as his shoulder moved. I want full documentation. I want a copy of the arrest report. I want the body cam footage released to my attorney by tomorrow morning. I am filing a formal complaint, and I am filing a federal lawsuit. Marcus, Harrison said, his voice pleading slightly, we can settle this. You know a lawsuit will drag the department through the mud. Your officer dragged the department through the mud when he put handcuffs on an innocent man because he didn't like my skin color and my attitude. Marcus shot back. I fought for this country, Bob. I served 20 years. I didn't do that so I could be treated like a suspect in my own neighborhood. I won't surrender my rights here any more than I would have surrendered to the enemy overseas. Harrison looked at Marcus. He saw the resolve. He knew he couldn't talk him out of it, and deep down he knew Marcus was right. Okay, Harrison said quietly. Okay, you'll have the footage. You'll have the report. We'll do it by the book. By the book, Marcus repeated. That's all I ever asked for. If Braden had followed the book, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Marcus walked out of the office. He walked past the booking desk. He walked past the rows of officers who couldn't look him in the eye. He walked out into the sunlight. He called an Uber. He wasn't going to ride in a police car again, not today. The lawsuit, Thorne versus the city, was filed 3 days later. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a dissection. Marcus's lawyer, a shark of a civil rights attorney named Elaine Powers, laid out the case with surgical precision: violation of the Fourth Amendment, unlawful seizure; violation of the First Amendment, retaliation for speech, battery, false imprisonment. But the real bomb dropped when the body camera footage was released. Marcus had insisted on transparency, and the chief, knowing he had no choice, released the unedited video to the press. It went viral within hours. The video was damning. It showed the bright sunny day. It showed Marcus standing peacefully. It showed Braden's aggressive approach. It captured the audio perfectly. Marcus's calm legal explanations contrasted with Braden's screaming and insecurity. The moment where Braden twisted the arm of a compliant veteran caused a collective gasp across the nation. News outlets picked it up. Veteran arrested while waiting for dry cleaning. Hero handcuffed by rookie. The comments section on the video was a war zone, but 99% of the fire was directed at Officer Braden. Veterans groups mobilized. The VFW, the American Legion, and the DAV all issued statements condemning the arrest. They showed up at city council meetings. They demanded accountability. Then came the discovery phase of the lawsuit. Elaine Powers requested Officer Braden's disciplinary history and his stop logs. The city tried to fight it, claiming personnel privacy, but a federal judge who happened to be a Vietnam vet ordered them to hand it over. The files revealed a pattern. Officer Braden had been on the force for 3 years. In that time, 85% of his suspicious person stops involved black men. He had stopped a black doctor for walking his dog. He had stopped a black mail carrier for looking lost. He had never found a weapon. He had never made a significant felony arrest. He was a harasser with a badge. The city's defense crumbled. They couldn't claim qualified immunity. Qualified immunity protects officers who make reasonable mistakes in unclear situations. There was nothing unclear about this. The law regarding reasonable suspicion had been settled for decades. Braden had knowingly violated it. During the deposition, Braden sat across from Marcus. Braden looked smaller now out of uniform, wearing a cheap suit. He refused to make eye contact. "Officer Braden," Elaine Powers asked, "can you articulate right now what crime you suspected Mr. Thorne of committing when you first approached him?" Braden shifted in his chair. He looked out of place. "Is looking out of place a crime in the penal code?" "No." "Did you have a report of a crime?" "No." "So you detained a United States military officer, assaulted him, and deprived him of his liberty because you didn't like the way he looked?" Braden didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence screamed the truth. The city settled the case for $2 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a single plaintiff civil rights case in the city's history. They wanted to avoid a jury trial at all costs. They knew a jury would look at Marcus Thorne, dignified, decorated, articulate, and then look at Kyle Braden, and they might award $10 million just out of spite. But for Marcus, it was never about the money. 2 weeks after the settlement check cleared, Marcus held a press conference. He stood on the steps of the Veterans Center he helped manage. He was wearing a suit, looking every bit the leader he was. "Justice was served on paper today," Marcus told the reporters. "But justice isn't just a check. Justice is change." He announced that he was donating the entire $2 million settlement. Half would go to the Thorne Legal Defense Fund, a new nonprofit dedicated to providing legal representation for veterans who were victims of police misconduct. The other half would go to local youth mentorship programs to help bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement. As for Officer Kyle Braden, he was fired. The internal affairs investigation, fueled by the pressure of the lawsuit and the public outcry, found him guilty of multiple policy violations. The state licensing board decertified him, meaning he could never work as a police officer in that state again. He was last heard of working security at a warehouse in another county, checking trucks at a gate. The dry cleaner eventually apologized too, though it wasn't their fault. The owner gave Marcus free dry cleaning for life. Marcus accepted it with a smile. But the story ends in a quiet moment. A few months later, Marcus was back at the same dry cleaner. It was another Tuesday. The sun was shining. He picked up his dress blues. He walked to his truck and carefully hung the uniform in the back seat. He touched the sleeve of the jacket, feeling the fabric. He thought about the oath he had taken at 22 years old. To support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He realized that domestic didn't always mean a terrorist or a spy. Sometimes the enemy of the Constitution was a man in a uniform who forgot that his power was a loan from the people, not a gift from God. Sometimes defending the Constitution meant standing on a sidewalk in handcuffs and refusing to break. Marcus got in his truck. He looked in the rearview mirror. He saw a police car drive by. The officer inside waved at him. It was a new guy, someone young. Marcus didn't flinch. He waved back. He wasn't afraid. He had served his time. He had fought his wars, and he had won this one too. Folks, let this sink in. A man gives 20 years of his life to protect our freedom only to have it snatched away in 15 minutes by a bias he couldn't control. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's the reality we need to fix. What would you have done if you were in Marcus's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have fought back? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And please share this story. We need to remind the world that true patriotism isn't about the flag on your sleeve. It's about the rights you defend for your neighbor. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next one.
Investigation officially closed. For additional unedited footage, remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for trusting Bodycam Incident Reports.